All right, now let's continue here. Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma has gazetted the election date for the 1st of November, as you've heard. Now, this means that the voters' roll will be sealed at midnight. Now, according to the IEC, over 1.2 million people registered to vote this weekend. In fact, that number is now 1.7 after that briefing. And more than 39,000 people use the online registration voter system, which is due to close at midnight tonight. Political parties and independent candidates have until tomorrow to submit their lists on the IEC's candidate nomination system. Dlamini-Zuma has emphasized the importance of young people voting in the elections. Now, to talk to us, we are joined via Zoom by Election Expert Dawie Scholtz. He's going to give us more information on this. Dawie, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Now, Dawie, before we talk about data, and I know that you love numbers, as it relates to this weekend's registration numbers and how ready the IEC is for the November 1 elections, I'd like us to start our discussion on the latest developments. So essentially, the ConCourt has affirmed that the IEC's reopening of the candidate nomination process was constitutional, lawful and valid. The focus now is on tomorrow's candidate submission deadline and more specifically the ANC. How massive a task lies ahead for the party, especially in provinces like KZN?
Massive task. I think they have to fill in the entire PR list for all of KZN and all of the Western Cape. So we're talking about several hundred, candidates that need to be uploaded into the system. I sincerely hope they are not starting today and have actually been working on preparing their submission before today, which I'm sure they would have. So, look, I think we have to have a look tomorrow evening at 1 minute past 5 to see whether the ANC made the deadline or not. But the reality is this is a huge victory for the ANC. I think it would have been incredibly damaging if they were not able to submit their candidates. Now they have an opportunity to rectify that, and they have a lot of work to do between now and 5 p.m. tomorrow afternoon.
I agree with you, especially because the IEC was at pains to stress that they don't think that deadline of 5 p.m. tomorrow will be extended any further. Now, let's get into the meat of the numbers. The voters' roll closes at midnight tonight. So voters for the lower government elections can still vote online, as we've heard. Now, looking at this weekend's numbers, the IEC was looking to register between 700,000 and 2 million voters before the registration of voting began this weekend. That number, as we understand it, is now 1.7 million. What's your reaction to, the overall, numbers of registered voters? I know you're saying this number is still less than, the number that we saw in the previous elections.
Look, it's a very, very low number, and I'm actually surprised to hear the IEC saying it's a great number that they're very happy with. I actually think it's quite a concerning number, and I'll tell you why for a number of reasons. So we have never in South Africa had an election where the number of people on the voters' roll decreased from one election to the next, and we are now facing a situation that for the first time that's going to be the case, because since 2019, the total number of people on the voters' roll has decreased by 1.1 million. Okay, that was before this weekend. Now, you would have heard from the announcement earlier this afternoon, the IEC said that there were 1.7 million registrations, but when they say registrations, they mean people who are changing their address, so people who are already registered and changing their address. And then, of course, also there is a portion of the people that are new registrations, so a true growth in the total number of people. And that true growth, so the true new registrations as part of the weekend and as through the online portal, was 433,000. Which means we have, we've lost 1.1 million voters and we've gained 430,000 voters. So it sounds like roughly 650,000 net loss of voters on the voters roll. So that points to, I think, an unprecedented occurrence where we have a smaller voters roll in this election than we did in the previous one. The other thing which is just interesting as well is in like the last 3 or 4 elections, we've always had sort of 1 to 2 million voters registering on one of these registration weekends, new voters. This time it was only 430,000. So it is a very small number. And I think it points to a couple of potential challenges. Firstly, there clearly is a number of people who were not interested in participating and registering, and that's a real risk for turnout in this election. I think it has potentially something to do with COVID, right? And some people maybe not wanting to come out during COVID. I think also a lot of the parties didn't really have a proper registration campaign. We've seen in the past, particularly the ANC is able to go door to door extensively for weeks and weeks before these, with lots of registration posters all over. And they didn't have that opportunity this time. So it was more difficult to get people out, I think, is one thing. And then, of course, the final point is that there's just a little bit of disillusionment with all of the parties. We see that in the polling, right? So I think it all points, for me, to potentially a lower turnout election, and it's something we'll have to watch very closely. But I must say, I'm not impressed by this number at all. I'm very happy for the 430,000 people who did make their way and got registered, but it's much lower than it could have been and should be. And it points to the fact that there's probably hundreds of thousands of young people out there who are not yet registered to vote in this election.
Now, you've pointed to some of the contributing factors that you think, is behind these low voter registration turnout. But one of the things that you didn't mention is just the disillusionment as far as what is happening in the country. We've seen a number of service delivery protests, and I think it's been quite unprecedented, the amount of municipalities or people within municipalities that have come out to just talk about how disillusioned they are. And I think at the very top of that reasoning is that these are people who historically have voted for the ruling party. Now they are very disillusioned in terms of the performance of that ruling party. And now I think one of the biggest hurdles is, if we do not vote for this party, which party do we vote for? The president over the weekend during his campaign, he said that, the ANC is not going to die. The ANC is here to stay forever. So I think a lot of probably the disillusionment does come in the fact that, a lot of people feel, let down by the ruling party.
Look, the reality is there's good quantitative data on this, right? So there's polling being done all the time. And the one recent poll from Ipsos asked everyone in the poll, do you think the country is headed in the right direction or not? And an overwhelming majority of people, I think it was something like 75% of people across all races, all provinces, whether they, are ANC supporters or not, etc., everyone was saying that the country is headed in the wrong direction. And that's one of the biggest wrong direction numbers I've ever seen in any of these polls. And it just points to me that there is disillusionment with the general performance of government, right? But you're absolutely right. If you then ask those voters, how do you feel about the DA? How do you feel about the EFF or any of the other parties that are on the ballot? They're not particularly excited by those parties either. So we do have a real problem here where I think people feel disillusioned from the ANC to some extent, or a larger group of people than ever before. But there's not yet an opposition party that's really managed to attract them, which is why I think or partly why we're facing this problem of activation of voters not going as well as maybe the parties want to.
Dawie, another point I'd like to talk on is that we know that the IEC has introduced a new device, a new system in terms of how people will vote. They've gotten rid of that zip device. How are they able going? I mean, are you confident that they will be able to handle, these elections, given the context that we are in at the moment with the pandemic? Now we have new devices. We've heard how they struggled a little bit in some registration centers with this device, that they ended up capturing some of the data manually. I mean, how confident are you that the IEC is ready come the 1st of November?
Look, I think we need to get the detailed report on how this weekend went exactly to be able to answer that question with total depth. But it must be said that there are some concerns, and I think one doesn't want to be harsh on the IEC, right? I think we all understand that it's short timelines. They would have preferred to have more time to prepare for the election, and perhaps were hoping and expecting for more time, and now they have to make it work on the short timelines. I think one also understands that they're working under quite complex conditions with COVID. So look, one doesn't want to be unfair towards the IEC. I think they've done probably quite a good job in general and have really tried to make it work. Having said that, they are implementing a new system, and it is clear that the system has had some glitches over the weekend, right? There were I think, many voting stations where the system wasn't fully operational. I know personally, I actually changed my registration details over the weekend, and the folks were very professional and very friendly, but unfortunately the system was down, and they had to capture it by hand, and only later I'd actually inputted my data into the system by hand. Luckily, they got it right, and I got my SMS that I was confirmed and registered in the right place. But, that sort of process is really prone to error, and I can imagine maybe some other voters weren't as lucky that it didn't work out for them. So I think, look, we'll have to wait and see, and we have to see the detailed report on the system readiness for the next election. But I think there are fair questions to be asked, and I think it's certainly of the utmost importance for election observers and certainly for all of the parties to very actively observe the election and observe election readiness for the IEC in this election.
All right, Dawie Scholtz, the elections expert, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you so much.